Hey y'all, this is Liberated Love Notes, a podcast on Living Corporate Network, hosted by yours truly, Brittany Janay, creator of Liberated Love Notes, critical self-reflections and affirmations for the culture. Y'all already know Liberated Love Notes is your weekly dose of self-reflection, affirmation, and reimagining for us by us. Today, y'all, I want to invite us to, I want to call for us to embrace the power of the pause. I embrace the power of the pause, the power in the pause. So, one of the things we oftentimes refer to or talk about in anti-racism work is this sense of white urgency or a sense of urgency. Essentially a cultural and structural tenet of white supremacy, this inclination to immediately react, do, perform, without sometimes attention to nuance, without space for connection and connecting, without attention to the need to work through and process. Sense of urgency or white urgency suggests everything needs to be responded to on spot immediately. That we need to do this, do that by a certain or in accordance with this socially constructed timeline. When we don't necessarily respond immediately or do this by then, or when we perhaps spend time, processing or want to prioritize connection, it can actually be interpreted in a culture of white urgency and sense of urgency. It can actually be interpreted as a character flaw to want to pause, to need more time. One might even be interpreted as, deviant from the norm, defective for not leaning into this way of being, this sense of urgency. I think about how sense of urgency can also, or white urgency can also show up as this in us, this need to over-explain, over-explanation. I think about how we got to stay ready, so we ain't got to get ready. Sometimes I think at the interpersonal level, something happens, we're asked a question and we feel like we're required to respond immediately. In conflict, there oftentimes ain't much time just to pause and sit with the tension. We might feel like in certain interactions we need and must always have the answer. And a lot of this is because our lives, our jobs, our surviving depends on it. We got to be ready. That's how culture and structures work, right? And we start to internalize it as the norm. It ain't us. It is absolutely the system. And so I just think about how in my day-to-day, I'm oftentimes in community with or in dialogue with my clients. I had a colleague who was working with a client and was presented with I guess for lack of a better term, tough question, a question that would have benefited from an opportunity to process prior to responding. And I am, even in the virtual environment, always just like tracking cues on screen, especially if folks are on video, the nonverbals. And I could tell that she felt as though she needed to respond immediately, and probably didn't give herself enough time to process. Could have probably benefited from more time, but really felt like, rightfully so, we all been there, felt like she needed to respond right then and there. And it shows. It showed. I think about how that oftentimes shows in our body. At least for me, I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in my tone. I can feel it in my breath when I don't allow space for the pause. I also think about how we oftentimes feel called to over-explain, explain, defend, right? I think about how white urgency will or used to have me feeling like I literally need to respond to every counterpoint or conflict in the Facebook comments about race or like racism, like literally had me stressed and out my element because I felt like I needed to hurry up and respond, have my point and voice heard. Folks I don't even know. Sometimes this urgency can have me in a situation when I'm continuing or wanting to stay in conversations about conflict, even when it ain't no longer reasonable. Like even when it's apparent that we're no longer hearing from each other, right? I have this inclination to want to hurry up and come to resolve, which is also like, what is resolve? To fix, to make a point, to be seen as right or even worthy, when we all know we ain't got to prove that. Ain't nothing to prove about our worthiness. But yeah, this culture of urgency will have us forgetting about the power and just the pause. I'm just saying, we've been talking about more broadly or culturally, we've been talking about ease. Y'all, the pause ends up being the gateway to ease, if you ask me. It's important. It's important that we know these things. It's important that we think critically about these things. It's important that we name these things. I love it when, and so I've probably shared this, I'm in this 9-month program with Resma Minicum, a program around somatic abolitionism, race-based trauma. He's the author, y'all, of the book, My Grandmother's Hands. Amazing, inspiring practitioner. And I love it when Brother Resma, reminds us that we are not defective. And so in as much as I am calling attention to urgency and over explanation and perhaps us not giving ourselves time to process, it ain't because we're defective. He even sometimes says, and I love it, I feel affirmed when he does, he says, respect the protect, right? Respect the ways in which we've learned and our bodies learn to protect ourselves. We got to over explain. We got to get to it. We got to do. And there is so much resource and power in expanding what I know. The more I know and name, and the more I carve out time for myself to process this stuff that I've known to become the norm, the more I have been able to make space for something different. And there is something about embracing the power in the pause. It's something we all have access to, right? It's something we all have access to, something that allows for us to move beyond this white urgency, sense of urgency, reactivity. I embrace the power of the pause. And I think in some ways it might seem small. It might seem really, really small. The pause, embracing the pause. And I would venture to say it's also a way that we can choose to take up space and reclaim our time by way of the power in the pause. Like, it may seem so small, but I imagine there is something restorative, may hit a little bit like resistance when we choose to reclaim our time by way of the pause. That may sound like, in this moment, I do not feel compelled to respond, react, nor over-explain. I do not feel compelled to prove anything, particularly my worth and my humanity. And when I feel my body become tense, my emotions rise, or my mind needs space and time to process, I'm going to honor that. I'm going to honor that. I will embrace the power in the pause. I want to repeat that. The power in the pause is ease. The power in the pause and owning and leaning into the power in the pause is some low-key resistance. No matter how small it may seem, the power in the pause is a reclamation of our time. It is our taking up of space. And so that might sound like, in this moment, I do not feel compelled to respond, react, nor over-explain. I do not feel compelled to prove anything, particularly my worth and humanity. When I feel my body become tense, my emotions rise, or my mind needs space and time to process, I will honor that. I will embrace the power in the pause. I have been in situations where, I've been thrown like all the way off, whether it's in like conflict or dialogue. And I've actually had to thank myself for those moments when I inserted the pause, right? I inserted the pause. I feel like I've been, especially because I do a lot of presenting and meeting with folks, certainly being in community, with those I work with, have been met with situations or questions on the spot, have tracked like folks trying to get me little tripped up, and I can feel my body respond. Like my heart will beat faster. I feel myself get a little, choked up. I honor that. And so in some cases, I'll actually strive to like settle my body first. And if you have been in either sessions or presented with me, sometimes that settling of body sounds like a hum. I'll hum to myself like, I'll hum, hit them with the, I'm not sure I have a finite answer around that. I might need some time to process, to come back with a thoughtful response. Like I hit folks with that, with the quickness, the hum and the, I don't know that I have a finite answer. I may need to process this a bit more before I come back with a thoughtful response. Or even in conflict, there has been moments where I've had to insert the pause by way of, in this moment, this has been a lot for my body, my mind, and I'm going to choose to respectfully disengage and tend to myself right now. And then just circling back on this, right? And that hit different because we are in a culture where, I need to answer that. We in this now urgency. that pause can hit different and feel real weird and radical to folks. And yet, I invite you to embrace it. Now, I will say, sometimes, urgency, this white urgency may show up as not wanting to work through and process the mess, the messiness, the hard stuff when we're in community with each other. This inclination to hurry up and bypass the conflict versus lean into it. And so sometimes embracing the pause means pausing to name and call attention to the tension, the conflict. Sometimes embracing the pause means feeling the tension instead of trying to bypass it. Now, I'm not saying we need to process everything in the now, but sometimes in community, this embracing of the pause looks like, you know what? We ain't got to come to resolve, but I'm tracking something going on. Like I'm tracking some tension, and I at least just want to name that it's happening. Yeah, that's what embracing the pause, the process, working through, looks like. Embracing the power in the pause is resource. Under the system of white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, I would venture to say that we are literally, this system literally got us living on the perpetual edge. It's draining. It's exhausting. Certainly has health implications. There are no shortage of studies that shows this, which is all the more reason why we deserve to embrace the power in the pause, to breathe, to process. It is all resource. And it is, I'm just going to say it again, it is part of the ease. Y'all know that was one of my intention words at the top of the year. It is part of the ease we are deserving of. And so this week, I just want you to be more intentional about doing this, right? Being this, embracing the power in the pause. There is something reparative, I would say. In my experience, there is something reparative, certainly restorative about disrupting this cultural systemic stuff, white urgency included. There is something reparative about disrupting it, even in the most incremental of ways. This week, do me a favor, where you can, how you can, embrace the power in the pause. Peace.